I grew up in Osakis, Minnesota, a small town with friendly neighbors, a strong sense of community, and a vast open field where kids played football and whatever sport was in season. Kenny Layton, the town's baker, would hand me a fresh loaf of bread every morning as I passed his shop on my way to school. By the time I graduated, I must have received at least $300 worth of bread from him. The buildings were old but sturdy, made from breccia with solid foundations. People kept their doors unlocked, always striving to be as neighborly as possible. Did you catch the Vikings versus Packers game the other day? What a game, Larry Anderson would say with a sly grin, knowing it would rile up my dad, a die-hard Vikings fan. Larry, our neighbor, was a staunch Packers supporter. After a Minnesota loss to Green Bay, my dad would avoid Larry, anticipating the teasing. It was amusing to see my usually calm father get so worked up. Life in Osakis was idyllic until I learned about the horrors of the house on the hill. My father was a single dad who did his best to raise me normally. He worked in advertising, creating handmade ads because he didn't know how to use a computer. He was old-fashioned and liked it that way. My mother died of pneumonia when I was 6. I remember bits and pieces of that time, my father crying and pleading with the doctors not to take her away yet. He wanted every moment he could have with her. I try not to bring it up with him. The pictures around the house are enough to remind him. I've caught him glancing at her photos with a sad look on his face. I know he thinks about her every day. I miss my mom. I have foggy memories of her carrying me around the house, pretending to steal my nose and pushing me around in my toy cart. Even though I don't remember her much, I still love her dearly. One day, while playing in the front yard, I noticed the house on the hill. It was a massive wooden house, and I would occasionally glance at its majestic features. When I became curious enough, I asked my dad about it. Dad, who lives up in that big old house on the hill. It's so big it could fit the whole town inside. He shook his head and smiled. That's old man Wentworth up there. He made his millions in high-priced real estate and decided to come to Osakis and build. He doesn't bother anyone. I think he just likes the peace and quiet this town has to offer. Nobody sees him much. He keeps to himself mainly, and that's fine with me. Don't bother him, and he won't bother you. He patted me on the head and I shrugged it off, returning to play with my Buzz Lightyear toy, which my mother had given me before she passed. I treasured it like it was the Holy Grail. Teddy and I were playing cops and robbers on the front lawn. Teddy was always the robber because he had a huge scar on his cheek from a dog bite when he was young. He asked me about the house on the hill, and I told him what my dad had said. He told me that some kids at school said vampires and goblins lived up there, and that if you ever saw them, they'd turn you into one of them. It scared me a little, but I trusted my dad over the schoolyard rumors. We should go up there and check it out. We'd be in the history books of this town, Teddy declared, puffing out his chest. I told him that wouldn't be a good idea, that Mr. Wentworth liked to keep to himself. Teddy sighed and told me to keep chasing him because he was about to rob a bank. Over the next couple of years, Teddy kept badgering me about the place. I repeatedly told him I wasn't interested and that he should go by himself if he wanted to so badly. He said he was going to venture up there after his parents went to bed and asked if I wanted him to come get me. I told him I enjoyed not having my butt turned into a grapefruit. and my back crying with pain. The next morning, my father called me downstairs to the kitchen where he was making toast. The smell of food filled the house and the aroma was mouth-watering. Orange juice was on the table and the plates were set out. My father still set out a plate for my mother even though he never put any food on it. It always made me sad, but it was his way of grieving. Teddy's father called me this morning and asked if he came around the house at all last night. Do you know anything about that? My heart dropped and my stomach felt sour. I hated lying to my dad, but I didn't want to rat out my best and only friend. I told him I had no idea where he could have gone and that he didn't tell me anything. My dad said it was okay and told me to eat before the Vikings game started. That night, I lay in bed thinking of Teddy and all the rumors about the vampires and goblins. I tossed and turned, imagining him as a vampire with blood dripping from his mouth and razor-sharp teeth. It scared me, but I told myself those were just stories to scare children. Teddy was never seen again, and the town stopped talking about him. It took a while, but life returned to normal, and everybody acted like nothing ever happened. It was like he never existed. I tried to bring him up to my teachers throughout the years, but they would just smile and say it was a shame and quickly move along. As I grew older, I became more curious, but it never developed into a fire hot enough for me to walk up to that old wooden house. I went off to college in Iowa and came back to Osaki's on holiday breaks, enjoying seeing my father and monitoring how he was holding up. I would go down for Thanksgiving and Christmas mainly, and he would fix us the typical foods for the holidays. He would still set out a third plate for my mother, which brought a tear to my eye every time. I would have to excuse myself to the bathroom to regain my composure, so he wouldn't see my sadness. I didn't feel sad about my mother. I felt sad for him. He was getting older, and there was nothing more I wanted for him than to meet someone else to make him truly happy. But it was clear that he was just waiting to die and join my mother in the afterlife. The next morning after Thanksgiving, I got up, packed the little I brought, and said my goodbyes. My father always told me to stay away from all the ladies falling at my feet. I laughed and exclaimed that if there were any ladies, I sure wouldn't trip over any. I got in my car and stared out the window at the house on the hill. I thought of Teddy and his sudden disappearance, and how the town basically forgot about him. Nobody seemed to really look too hard for Teddy. It was like they accepted he was gone and was never coming back. I saw stories of other missing kids around the nation and the manhunts that ensued. There was nothing like that for Teddy, only whispers here and there. I started driving down the dirt road leading to Main Street, my eyes never leaving the house on the hill. It was like it was calling my name, a force pulling me into the dark veil of the house. Why not check it out? Why not see who lives there? I looked at my passenger seat and noticed a small turkey I brought from my dad. He said he didn't want it because he already had bought a big one, so I said I would bring it back to my apartment and prepare it myself. This was my ticket to not be creepy if someone answered the door. I could tell them that I wanted to introduce myself and hand over the turkey, telling them it's in the season with a fake smile. I made a left instead of the right I usually took when driving up to the house. The road leading up to the house was paved in gravel, but overgrown with weeds, the tires crunching beneath me as I climbed toward the crown of Osaki's. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. Not dangerous, just off. Like the house was breathing, like the windows were eyes. I parked a few yards from the porch and turned off the engine, sitting there for a moment with the turkey in my lap, wondering what in God's name I thought I was doing. I got out anyway. The house loomed overhead, its roof lines jagged against the gray morning sky, paint peeled in long curls, but somehow the windows were spotless. I climbed the steps, every board creaking beneath my weight, and knocked. Nothing. I waited, knocked again, still nothing. I was about to leave when the door creaked open a few inches. No one was behind it. Hello?" I called out. "I brought some, Thanksgiving leftovers." Silence. The air inside smelled like dust and sage. I pushed the door gently. The house was dim, the light filtering through thick curtains. There were no electric sounds, no humming refrigerator, no heater, just silence. But it wasn't empty. At the end of the hall stood an old man in a velvet robe, tall and stiff as a grandfather clock. His white hair was slicked straight back, and his face was dry as parchment. He looked at me with eyes that were flat, not dead, but not alive either. "I'm sorry to intrude," I said, holding out the turkey like it was a peace offering. "I'm from down in town. My dad's Jerry Hollis. I just figured I'd say hi." He stared for a moment, then took a step forward. "You look like your mother," he said. His voice was soft, grave-like. I froze. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" He didn't answer. He turned and walked slowly into another room. I stood there holding the bird, dumbfounded. After a moment's hesitation, I followed. The room was a sitting parlor. Massive windows, lace curtains, a fire in the hearth that gave off no heat. The old man sat in a tall-backed chair and gestured toward the opposite one. I sat. "You knew my mother?" I asked. He nodded. "Long ago, before Osekis." He didn't say more, just watched the fire with his hands steepled. I felt ridiculous holding the bird, so I set it down on the coffee table. "I had a friend," I said. "Teddy. He disappeared when we were kids. The last thing I remember is him talking about coming up here. That night." The old man didn't move. "I know this sounds crazy," I said, "but if you know something, anything." "There is a ledger," he said finally. He stood again, slow and deliberate, and crossed the room. From an antique cabinet, he pulled out a leather-bound book and handed it to me. I opened it. Names, dates, each one with a red slash through it, and there, near the middle of the book, Teddy Morrison, June 17th. My throat tightened. Why is he in here? "Because this place keeps record of what it takes," the old man said. He sat again as if the act of speaking had drained him. "What are you?" I whispered. His eyes flicked up to mine. "Caretaker." He reached toward the fire and drew something from a basket, a key. He handed it to me. "You should see for yourself." He stood again and walked toward a side door, beckoning. I followed. We descended a narrow staircase to a room carved into the stone of the hill itself. It was cold, damp. The walls were covered in drawings, dozens of them, pinned up like evidence. Each one was of a child. Some were detailed, others frantic and rough. but they all had one thing in common. The eyes were missing, erased, scratched out. "I've tried to preserve what I could," the old man said, "but this house feeds on memory, on belief. When they speak of it, when they wonder, when they fear, it takes. But it gives something back, too. A kind of silence, a forgetting." He gestured toward a stone archway. "You can walk through," he said, "but you won't come back the same. You might not come back at all." I stared at the dark beyond the arch, then at the drawings. "Teddy's in there?" He nodded. I stepped forward, but just before crossing, I stopped. "I don't want to forget him," I said. The old man gave me a look, deep and weary. "Then don't," he said. I turned back. I didn't go through the arch. I don't know what was on the other side, and I never saw the old man again. When I told my father what happened, he was quiet for a long time. Then he took the turkey from the table, warmed it up, and said, "You were brave to go." He never said more about it. Years later, the house on the hill burned to the ground. No one knows how it started. There was no lightning, no gas line. Just one morning it was ashes. Nothing left but smoke and scorched stone. But in my apartment, in a locked drawer, I still have the ledger. And every year on June 17th, I open to Teddy's name and speak it aloud. Because forgetting him would be letting the house win. Because remembering is a kind of defiance. Because he was my friend, and I owe him that much.